Hello, once again, everyone. It's nice for me to be with you today at this session. So today I would like to talk about our experience, Georgian experience, how we constructed non-traded sticky price inflation measure. And specifically before that, let me just very briefly tell you why we decided to construct this measure. Here I've also just prepared with my teammates as well short presentation, Panchanok, and maybe I will first I will just share it with you, and then maybe we can just talk about the technical details as well, how we did it, how long it lasted for us, and so on. Before that, let me tell you that National Bank of Georgia and also the Central Bank of Armenia, they were the first, just published papers about the non-traded sticky price inflation measure. And there we also analyze our methods, why we decided, and rationale behind our motives of constructing this measure. In our case, in Georgian case, we have this paper called this Core Inflation Requiem. It sounds, I know, like very kind of loud, but we basically I will show you why we call this out to our paper. And here you see the whole bunch of people, the whole team of Georgia, and also Doug and Jared, who were helping us in this regard. And before that, just let me tell you how it fits to our analysis and why we decided. Basically, since we are thinking at the National Bank of Georgia, we're thinking to move to the FPAS Mark II framework. Maybe you know you have some sort of information about FPAS frameworks, but before that, let me tell you that it's FPAS Mark II is a new generation of FPAS Mark I framework, and this framework helps policymakers to carry out analysis in a structured way, and exactly by answering these three fundamental questions, what we see here. And specifically, where is the economy now? The first and that's most important question that we need to answer in policymaking. Second, what are the underlying forces behind this? And then based on answering these two fundamental questions, we need to think about what policymakers need to do to anchor inflation and inflation expectations. So now how for this non-traded sticky price inflation measure fits to our framework. Basically, it helps us exactly to answer these two fundamental questions. The first two ones, where is the economy now and what are the underlying forces? Because we believe that a non-traded sticky price inflation measure is one of the best measures of the underlying inflation forces. You may know that Atlanta Fed also has this type of methodology. Atlanta Fed also publishes sticky price inflation measure in tandem with the flexible inflation. And here the logic in case of Atlanta Fed is simple, like they decompose CPI basket into two parts. From their perspectives, and there they use this economic rationale, and also they observe the duration of price changes for specific products. And based on this, they have split, not just throwing anything out of the basket, but split the basket into two parts. First part is the prices that are exhibited to change more frequently on a frequent basis, and prices that are set on a more infrequent basis. And here at the pivotal methodology, we also looked at this, and we also just took some insights from their methodologies. But in our case, in contrast to the Atlanta Fed's case, in our case, we don't have just sticky and flexible. What we have is added one additional kind of perspective, which is non-traded part. So we've decided to look into our CPI basket into two parts. The first part would be the traded prices, which are more prone to frequent changes because of the many factors, and one of the key factors in our case, in case of Georgia, and it's similar to Armenia as well, is that flexible prices are prone to frequent changes because of the exchange rate movements and high variability in the exchange rate. I mean our local currency against to mostly the US dollar. And in our country cases, to give you the better insights what's happening with us, in our country cases, we have high dollarization. And this high financial dollarization leads us to think very carefully about this issue and about in terms of monetary policy transmission mechanisms, the exchange rate, the channel exchange rate channel plays a significant role with us. So given this, that these flexible prices mostly just show us also and reflect these high exchange rate volatilities as well. We wanted to also kind of decompose our CPI basket because of that. So as I mentioned, we have this traded part, which we call this flexible prices, and we have also this non-traded part, which is in our case, and not only in our case as well, in many other countries' cases as well, in case of Armenia as well, maybe in case of Thailand as well, in non-traded part, which is mostly services in our case, and some specific regulated products, prices of specific regulated products. For example, in case of Georgia, it's a bread. They exhibit some stickiness in their prices. To be honest, we don't like this word term sticky, but it's at least the best kind of term to reflect what we mean. What we ideally mean, and what we mean basically that prices that are prone to more infrequent changes, and price setters of these non-traded products, once they are resetting their prices, given that they are setting this like resetting this with less frequently, then we believe that they incorporate their inflation expectation there, if there is kind of inflation premium, or if we see kind of basically we believe that they take this into account, and given this we see that this non-traded sticky price inflation measure is also a very good indicator of inflation expectation. They better incorporate this. So to give very briefly, this was the motive in our case to construct this measure. We have the measure non-traded sticky price inflation, which helps us to see if there is an issue with inflation expectations, which is, as we said at the beginning, is a key priority for inflation targeter policymakers to look at, because they have to think about the inflation expectations, because they have to anchor that. So now why we prefer this measure to core inflation. Here, I would like to show you this part. Basically, as you know, there are several underlying inflation measures. People consider core inflation as one of them. But we believe that the core inflation, because of the fact that it throws out some stuff out of the basket, and it does not take into account some important informations. We believe that it's not as good measure as, in our case, as non-traded sticky price inflation. And what we believe is also well reflected in our history as well. If we, for example, observe what happened from the beginning of inflation targeting in our country, we actually adopted inflation targeting in 2009. And here you see the story from 2011. Basically, if you just observe what happened in our core inflation measure, and if you also just try to take insights from our policy decisions based on this measure, you may have some kind of you may see that there's not something in line. For example, you will see that in some cases, once we are experiencing a declining core inflation, our policy stance was tightening, especially, for example, let me just take your attention to this period and that period as well. Here, this is after the pandemic period. Core inflation measure was declining in our case, while we were tightening policy at the same time because we were seeing that underlying inflation forces were exacerbating. Similar type of the situation we have currently as well. Core inflation remains at lower level, but we still try to keep our policy stances tight because we see that non-traded sticky price inflation and underlying inflation measures are still elevated, far above the targets at this point. And that's why this is at the end of period is in March here, that's why here we tried to keep our policy stance tight, and that's why we are very cautious. Now, let me tell you very briefly, before going to the R program directly, how we did this. Basically, I believe that once we do it for many other countries, the time for constructing this measure will go down, will be lower and lower. But since we were in the kind of pioneers in this process, Armenians and Georgians, we needed more time there because we needed more to think about how we should have done this. Basically, it's not based on some statistical sources, statistical methods. It's purely, in our case, based on the economic logic and rational. So what we've done was that at first we just sat and looked into our CPI basket. In Georgian case, our CPI basket consists of more than 300 products. And the majority of these products, approximately 70%, depending on the time, it was varying for sure, but it's more tradable and exhibits more flexibility. So prices are set more frequently there. And in case of 30% of our basket, approximately, which is more service-related products, and some, as I mentioned at the first, some regulated products as well, we clearly see the dynamic there that these prices are set less frequently. So here, based on this logic, that if we see that, for example, some kind of products are more labor intensive, meaning that it's more service related, and the wage setting also played there the key role, and wages are reset on a more less frequent basis, then we kind of think that such kind of products are more in a non-traded basket rather than in traded flexible basket. So also, as I mentioned, we have some regulated products. I've said bread, but also we have some other products as well. And here we basically attribute and here we have these products in non-traded basket. If you just go product by product in your cases as well and look them into from these perspectives, you may have slightly different perspectives depending on your economy, but based on our economy, we got such picture that almost 70% of our CPI basket was flexible, and almost 30% was just non-traded sticky. If you just compare to the what Atlanta Fed publishes, it's exactly vice versa. In case of US CPI, 70% goes to the sticky price basket and 30% goes to the flexible. So here, as I mentioned, because we are doing this at first, just judging and also thinking very deeply which product should go to which basket. Just leaded us to think more, and also it lasted slightly longer. Overall, we had 1 month. In 1 month, we constructed this measure. We started it in November 2023, and we had this measure by the end of the year 2023. Here you see the results in our case. Basically, if you observe, the red line here just corresponds to our non-traded sticky price inflation measure, and this dashed line corresponds to the flexible price inflation. And this black line is a headline. In our case, once we were thinking about, okay, what we have to do is that while we were constructed, we chose, in our case, almost 64 products which belong to the non-traded sticky price basket. The rest of them belong to the flexible inflation and flexible CPI basket. So here, there are several ways how we can do in terms of flexible prices. First is just concentrate on non-traded sticky prices and construct this measure. And then based on this, once you have this measure of the non-traded sticky prices, what we can do is just treat flexible prices as a part of residual from the headline. And totally what we have to say that is flexible, and non-traded sticky prices can just sum up to this headline inflation. Another way is just also observe for sure product by product in flexible price inflation as well. It's also a good approach because the economic landscape is very varying and changing, and we may see some kind of movement there. Some products maybe also could be just moved out from our flexible basket, and some products could just exhibit recently more changes, and maybe there could be some kind of transformation in our CPI basket. So depending on what's your priority, we can look in both ways, like observe the products of flexible price inflation as well, how they move, and think what drive them to move in that way. That's a key question in our case. We don't look at just, for example, here we see some spikes in non-traded sticky prices, but we did not smooth this out because we first investigated what happened there, what drove these prices to go up. And then for sure, because we knew that fact, we just did not throw away. So here, based on this rationale, we can say that we all can observe the dynamics in flexible as well as in non-traded sticky prices. And we can say that we have to explain what's happening there. Yes, and let me tell you once before showing you how we do all the stuff. Here we also, what was very important for us is that we believe that these measures, these non-traded sticky price inflation measures, given that it well incorporates inflation expectation there, is also a well measure of policy efficiency, monetary policy efficiency, how well it incurs inflation expectations. And based on this, we believe that if we have just seen how our endogenous credibility was changing over the time based on estimating non-traded sticky price inflation, we would be able to see really logical results. So yes, you see here, for example, what we've done here is that we estimated our credibility measure. Asya is also the author of the paper of the endogenous credibility measured, and we based our methodology on their paper here. If you are interested, we can go like into detail here as well, but just key insight from here is what I would like to share with you is that we just looked on this credibility measure based on this course inflation and non-traded sticky price inflation, and we wanted to show to the public and policymakers as well that once we are just using non-traded sticky price inflation, we see a much more logical result in our case. The key divergence here is especially after starting the pandemic. Here you see that, for example, at the onset of 2021, there was like big decline based on the credibility, based on the core inflation measure, while we had this upward shift in our credibility because we started tightening our policy at the onset of 2021. And while we have this, like definitely we have different picture, we did not believe this dynamic there. So briefly, this was all. If you have the questions regarding this, I would be happy to answer about this part. Before me showing you these R codes, let me tell you that overall, as I said, we had 1 month to construct this measure. It lasted 1 month. But I believe that once we know the approach, the methods already, how to treat this, it takes lower and lower time for other countries, for example, for the Thailand. First, if we want to construct the measures for example, any other country, we have to think about their CPI basket, what's happening there, right? One example of what I mean is that, for example, in the United States, and not only in the United States, I believe maybe in Thailand as well, the rent prices are prone to more less frequent changes, right? So they are not frequently reset. In case of Georgia and maybe in case of Armenia as well, it exhibits more frequent changes. So we had to think about as well, should we belong these shelter and rent prices to more flexible prices, or should we belong these to more, for example, non-traded sticky price basket? And here the key aspect in our case was that given that we have this non-trade, given that we set our prices in USD, like in rent prices, given that we basically, and given that our exchange rate exhibits high volatility because of various shocks, our rent prices also exhibited and depicted high volatility. So here it is a kind of sort of issues that we have taken into account once we are looking into the CPI basket of different countries. For example, also another example is alcoholic beverages. In some countries, alcoholic beverages are prone to more frequent changes, their prices. In our case, for example, and in other countries are prone to less frequent changes. And in the United States, for example, if you look at the CPI basket for that, how Atlanta Fed decomposes it, we will see that alcoholic beverages are in the sticky price basket. So that's the point here. Maybe Asyajan or Doug or anyone, if you would like.
Thank you. Is there a problem with my video camera right now? Okay, it's okay. So the only thing I would say is this. So in the design of forecasting and policy analysis system, the 3 essential ingredients that differentiates FPAS central banks from non-FPAS central banks is, where is the economy today? What are the underlying forces? And what do I need to do with my instruments to achieve my objectives? So when you were presenting it, Miriam, you only talked about those first 2 things, okay? And I think you have to talk about all 3 of them. And
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I'll give you an example of that, okay, but why. So we're not statisticians. We don't throw things out to get this thing called non-traded. What we do is we take the CBI and we decompose it into flexible traded prices versus non-traded sticky prices. Now, why do we do that? Well, because both are equally important. Okay, one's not more important than the other. That's the problem with the statistical methodology, is it tries to say that we're throwing the volatile stuff out. So we're not doing that. But let me give you an example why you have to think about this in a forward-looking framework. You have to think about all three of those essential ingredients when you think about measures of prices, flexible and non-traded. Let's suppose that you have an economy like Thailand, okay, where things are really anchored, okay? So we would expect that non-traded sticky price inflation would be pretty rigid, okay, because flexible prices would be allowed to adjust, okay, to help facilitate resource allocation in the economy. So we want the exchange rate to act as a flexible exchange rate so that when there's shocks, it can move. Well, traded goods prices are going to move with it. And so the complete story here is not just where is the economy today, what are the underlying forces? It's also about what do we need to do with our instruments, okay, to be consistent with the exchange rate, not just today, but going forward and so on, right? So that would be my comment. That you emphasize
absolutely
those
agree with
first
you, Doug. Just I was focusing on non-traded sticky price inflation, like for sure, and I mentioned that third component plays at most importance in case of policy making, right? Because they have policymakers. The key aspect is that policymaker has to think about how to reach their goals, and here's the third component is exactly on that. Okay, thanks.
So let me give you an example, though. I want to give you an example about how to think through that. Okay, you get hit with a contractionary shock. You want your exchange rate to depreciate. Okay, so traded goods prices obviously will be rising. Okay, non-traded sticky prices won't be changing very much if it is anchored, but you'll have to understand that dynamic, that the real exchange rate depreciation is cyclical. It's cyclical, which means that it will be changing some prices in the CPI, increasing them, but those forces will be unwound because it's cyclical. So I would say it's very important for us to stress that it's economists that we want. These notions are consistent with how economists think about the economy, organizing their thoughts in terms of consumers, businesses, rigidities, nominal rigidities, real rigidities, and stuff. So it's not a statistical thing. The statistical methodology was a disaster that we saw during the summer of 2021, where they were throwing all the stuff out of it that were rising. And naturally, they ended up pushing the transitory story far too long. Okay, so this is a call to action to bring economics back. But thanks.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
Thanks, Zach. Then before giving floor to Asi about this, let me just talk about more about the open softwares. So we are using here different, under FPAS Merc 2, we try to use open source softwares because it's easy to replicate and to share with others as well. And it's more kind of cheaper, right? And basically, it's a way more convenient for transparency as well, which also plays a key role in FPAS Mark II framework. So here we have Python and R mostly that we are trying, not only Python and R, also for Tinier Julia, we are trying to just also transform our work there as well. And we are using sorts of different softwares, but here we will focus today on just R and Python. In case of me, I'm working in R. R is also the open source software, you know, but some packages in R are not just free. You need some packages to kind of buy, but mostly it's like free. So here, let me show you what we've done in our case. So basically, once we were trying to construct our measure of non-traded sticky price inflation, we basically decided to do it in different softwares, and one of them was R. Here, the first step was to try to web scrap directly from our statistics office. To load the data directly from the statistics office webpage, and then to choose a specific product that we have in our non-traded sticky basket, CPI basket. This was one option. And another option was that let's just prepare also, it's also kind of very similar as let's just have this data automatically just updated from once the National Statistics Office, in our case in Georgia, will publish or update CPI, then lets it automatically update in our spreadsheet and then automatically recalculate or update our sticky CPI measure. So here, in case of Georgia, there are several issues, but in other country cases, for example, in case of the United States, it's easier. In case of Georgia, once we tried to web scrape directly from the web page of our statistics office because of its application programming interface, it was kind of more challenging, and because of the fact that we are here to just kind of save our time and not to waste too much time, the options that will just lead us to spend less time would be better for us. So what we did was that at first, I'll show you our spreadsheet, how it looks like. We just, on a technical part, we just choose several products here. It's in Georgian, mostly in names, sorry for that, but we chose several products here. And then we have the weights for these products, which in case of Georgia is not public. It's another issue as well. We don't have publicly available yet the specific weights of specific products. We mostly have publicly available the weights of some sub components of our CPI. So here we take advantages from direct relationship from the National Statistics Office of Georgia, and they just provided these weights to us, and we use this here. So given that these weights here, as you see, are not public, we are just need this.
Mariam, we can see your we can't see your exact well.
Thanks. Here now?
Yes.
Yeah. So I was talking about this kind of here in this spreadsheet, we have these weights. So this is how our database looks like. It's kind of data frame in the terms of our language, our open source software language. And here we have then how we need to have this data formed in case of R to be easily kind of transformable and easily easily construct our measure. This is how it should be like. Here we have these indices. So in case of Georgia, National Statistics of Georgia publishes directly these indices for year-over-year changes of specific products and also month-over-month changes. We have both here, year-over-year and month-over-month as well. For sure, what we've done at first was based on month-over-month indices we constructed, then year-over-year changes as well, 3 months over 3 months changes as well. But let me show you just one example. So this is how it should be like in our case of R, our data frame, our data structure. Then what we do basically is on the technical parts, what we do is just try to choose the specific packages in R. Packages in R basically are to tell for people who may have less experience with R, some packages help us to more easily just implement different types of operations because there are embedded some functions and codes. So that's why we just choose here the packages that we need to construct this or to do any type of work. So here mostly we chose basically, as you see, 6 packages. Mostly what I would like to all our users is just to use always this declare package, which is for data manipulations and for data analysis. It's very helpful and it's very kind of useful in many terms. And also for data visualization, what we need to do is to use ggplot package, ggplot2 package, which basically, if you're interested, I can share with you. There's kind of book as well on this package, particularly how rich it is and how it can help to various users. So also, I have here this FredR package. This is a very good one because as I mentioned, different countries have different API styles, right? United States has this Fred, which has very good API style, and then here it's easier for us to directly load and web scrape the data from Fred. That's why here we have this Fred package as well, which helps us to directly load the data from Fred, whatever we want. And I'll show you that for what we do. For example, we also directly load the data for sticky prices from Fred for the United States. So this is all. In case of R, what we do is just like we chose specific packages. And then we, very shortly, since we had this spreadsheet just automatically updated once there is updating the CPI data at the National Statistics Offices. Then what we do is just like we just load. The first step is loading the data into our R and the RStudio interface. And then what we do is just like, firstly, I will not go deep dive into the technical details. Firstly, what we need to is to clean our data, whatever we have with kind of, for example, NAs. If there is an NA, then we need to treat them properly. Then what we do is that since we have this at the fourth step, since we have these weights, as I've shown you here, those weights for P2 all columns, those weights basically are not summing up to 1. And in our case, what we've decided is just to normalize those weights to 1 and to, based on the normalized weights, to compute and to construct this measure, kind of weighted mean of these indices and these normalized weights. So this is what we do here at the fourth step. We normalize these weights. Then we start exactly, as you see, calculating weighted mean index for each month. And this is how technical it looks like. We need some looping as well here. And at the fifth step, we already have done this constructing this measure. Then all the rest part, the code is not itself, as you see, pretty long. It's short code, really efficient in that case. As a sixth step, what we do is we just try now to visualize our data. And for visualizing, we are using different types of data transformations here, and then just plotting using ggplot. So I will just, this is totally, if you would like to see, this is the code that we use for loading and constructing this measure. But before that, this is, before we just run this code, let me tell you that the key aspect is just preparing your database in a proper way. Here, what we need is, for example, if the central bank or any other institution who would like to construct the contracted sticky price inflation for their country, what we need is just to have properly structured database with weights. We definitely need the weights in our case, if it's not available for sure publicly. And we also need some indices here, or inflation, some numbers just presented in that way. Here you see them mass here. And indices for specific products. You see some NAs as well, what I mentioned. And in R, we treat them at the second step. Based on this, if we just, once we have this kind of data source and once we have this code, just updating this and constructing this measure needs a few times, like it's shortly manageable and doable. For me, I believe that the key aspect once we are constructing this measure is just looking into the components, which component should belong to which basket. And here, once we have chosen this proper non-traded sticky price basket, then it's easily doable with R to construct this measure. As a second step, once we have these non-traded sticky prices in codes, we see that there is also the key aspect in our case was to construct the flexible price measure as well. To construct the flexible price measure, firstly, we need to choose which method do we use. We treat flexible prices as a residual of our total CPI basket once we have this non-traded part as already in the different basket. So here we exactly did this. So once we have these 64 products for non-traded sticky CPI basket, then we used headline CPI to construct and the weight of the flexible products and non-traded sticky price products. And then we've constructed flexible CPI. The method is very easy. We are just first we need the weight for flexible products, easily just subtracting from one these weights of non-traded sticky prices. Here what we do is just at this step, we are just getting these weights. Then what we are doing is just constructing based on this one line and small computations of these flexible prices. And then these codes are for definitely data visualization. ggplot is the package that we use here. So let me show you the results. But before that, let me tell you that R has one big advantage. You can just construct your reports here. You can have your interactive web pages here as well using R Shiny application, for example, that we are very actively using. R Markdown is a kind of, we are working now. So R Markdown is exactly using for that, for reporting. You would like to have your reports in, I don't know, in HTML format or in PDF or Word format, depending on you. But in our case, once you have this code there in R Markdown format, and once you just decide what type of report you would like, you can just construct this report in you see the time now, how long it takes, in a second. So this is very fast, and this is a measure that we have here. You basically see that based on this, based on properly kind of constructed data source and these codes, which automatically updates these measures, we can have in, I don't know, in seconds, this measure updated. Here it's like the target for our NTSPI measure is 2% in our case. And as you see, for example, what you see here is that, as I've shown in the slides as well, in case of Georgia, non-traded sticky prices remained elevated. And it's about than any other measures, headline or flexible. And it's sign for us to be very cautious while we are making decisions. So here also, I would like to show you, maybe Asya is better to show you this in Python, but here also what we do is that we can, as I said, in our web script directly from Fred. And here, let me show you these codes. Here we have the availability to directly load the data from the link of if the web page is gives us this opportunity. And here we directly loaded this data from the thread. and just showed you how we can do it for the US to just visualize in that case this sticky price inflation measure. If you want to, for example, if you want to construct this measure, maybe Asya is better to show this in Python based on the United States. Based on Georgia, as I told you, this is what we do. But if in case of the Thailand, if you would like to construct this measure, what we need is just from your perspectives, what do you think, how you should have split this CPI basket? And then it's very easily computable based on this or softs and constructable based on the softs your measures. If you have questions, I would like to answer to your questions. If not, maybe Asyajan, you can just the floor is yours, and maybe you can just show us how you've done this in Python. Sorry, for the United States.
Thank you very much, Miriam, for the interesting presentation. So I will just show you how we also do this in Python. So Miriam covered already the aspects of why we build this index, why it is important. Basically, this is the sticky price inflation, and this is the measure that the central bank should care about. This also is the indicator of the inflation expectations among the households and firms in the economy. So this is very important for the central bank to have this measure to exclude the flexible parts from the inflation basket, the parts that they cannot really have any effect on with their instruments. So as Miriam already mentioned, we constructed the index for Georgia. We also have the index for Armenia. Armenia was one of the first that we did this exercise for. But to start with, we used the US data because the US data is easily accessible. It's very easy to just directly download data from Fred. Everything is available there. And Mariam also said that in case of Georgia, we need to go to statistics department, a website, and get data from there. It's similar to Armenia, so it's not so easily accessible. But of course, with the current technologies and web scraping techniques, it's also possible to do and to automate everything. But we started our exercise with the data-rich country, with the US, and we do this exercise in both in Python and in R. So our plan is to construct these measures for as many countries as possible. So we have been already working on the measures for the United Kingdom, for Korea, and so on. And yeah, so let's go through the Python code. But also before that, I was going to say that we plan to create a separate page on the Better Policy Project website where we are going to put these measures with regular updates. So we update these measures of sticky price inflation every month, because it is based on the CPI data, and we have the CPI data releases every month. So as soon as we have a data release, we can update our measure. So in Python, we constructed these measures using the Jupyter Notebook. So if you have never used the Jupyter Notebook before, it is right now on the screen, you can see the environment. The Jupyter Notebook is very straightforward to use. It consists of these cells, and we can write parts of the codes in the cells and just run them as we move forward. And as in the case of R here as well, we need to use certain packages when we do certain exercises. the packages we use here are the most standard ones in Python, which is pandas, the one that deals with the data frames. We have NumPy for numerical calculations, Matplotlib and Seaborn for visualization. So what we are going to do here, we are importing the Atlanta Fed sticky price inflation. So the Atlanta Fed is one of the Federal Reserve reserves in the United States, and they have very nice website where we can find the data, for example, as a sticky price inflation. So they have been constructing this for a while. Miriam already showed the methodology. So it is possible to just directly import the data from a web source. So right here we have the link. We are just importing it. And creating this output, which is a data frame. So this is a data frame that only has like two columns, which is the first one is the date and the second is the data. And the data frames in Python also have index, so it shows the location of the specific data. So we are going to use this data that we just imported for visualization and so on. And for that, we're going to create a few measures like the month on month, year on year, 3 month over 3 month annualized, and so on. Okay, and now what we need to do is to use the similar package as in R to import data directly from Fred. So it is the Fred API. We are going to use this to import data that we are considering as tradables. So the idea is to remove tradables from the sticky price inflation measures. And here are the ones, the categories: households, personal care, medical care, alcoholic beverages, infants appeal, and some services, because we already mentioned that most of the services, they are not non-tradable. So but there are some that we are going to remove. So these all categories are going to be imported as separate data frames, and we are just going to combine them together into one data frame called tradables. We do some calculations, like calculating the month-on-month measure, and it's going to be added into this data frame, the same one called tradables, as new columns. So the next step will be to import the weights and calculate the weighted index. So that's what we do. We combine all the data together, and then we remove the tradables from the core sticky price CPI. Again, we'll do some calculations, calculate the month on month, 3 month over 3 month, year on year annualized series of these. And finally, we just do the visualization, like we use the 3 month over 3 month annualized measures to plot together. The orange line is Atlanta Fed's core sticky price index, and the green one is our non-tradable sticky price inflation. And even though they are pretty close to each other, in some periods, especially when there are crises, there are some significant differences. And we also have the measure constructed for, this is the year over year. So we can see that even though in the end of the period, like of this graph, which is this is 2024 measures, we can see that this measure of inflation is starting to cool down, but it is still very far away from the target. So the target line is this dashed line right here, and the value for it is 2.5, and we took it also from the Atlanta Fed's dashboard. So the inflation target for the US for the PCE inflation is 2%. For the CPI inflation, it's 0.23 percentage points higher than that, so 2.3 approximately, and it should be higher for the sticky price inflation. So we take it equal to 2.5. So this measure also helps us to think that maybe so the Fed was considering two rate decreases this year, or even more in the beginning of the year, but looking at the measures like this can show us that there is probably going to be some caution about it, because the inflation, especially the most sticky version of the inflation, is not yet close to the target, and it might also indicate that there are still elevated inflationary expectations. So so I guess that is all, and now we are ready to answer to the questions.
Maybe if there are no questions, as agent, we can. For us, it's the codes in case of R is easily shareable. We can share maybe in terms of technical. I am not really sure about this like data stuff, because as I mentioned, in case of Georgia, we don't have this publicly published, this the weight. But yeah, if there's any interest from Panchanok especially, we can share the codes in R, for example. I'm not sure about Python as agent.
Yeah, so we can also share the Python codes, especially for the US. It's easy because all the data is public, so there is no issues with the data, privacy issues and so on.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I have like some questions about how you define flexible, like how do you section goods and services in the basket into flexible and sticky? Is that purely based on judgment of central bankers, or do you have like a quantified measure for that job? And also for the tradable and non-tradable.
Thank you. Maybe I'll go first as agent, because in our case, as I mentioned at the first step, we purely based our analysis on judgment. And this was not, I mean, what you may mean is that what, for example, Atlanta Fed has, they just, based on micro data, they were available to see the duration of changes of prices for specific products. For example, they have this 4.3 months. And if some products prices changes on a frequent basis in this period, they call this flexible. In our case, which was not the same. What we did was that we definitely knew which part of our CPI baskets were tradable, and which it depicts more frequent changes. So here we use two rationals in terms of identifying non-traded sticky prices. First, if the product is labor intensive, we we used as a criteria. Then if it's labor intensive, it's mostly service sector, and there is the wage price setting is plays a key role here. So that's why we said that it should be it most likely is non-traded sticky. And the second criteria was that if it exhibits less, if it's more inelastic to prices, then it means that if it's more inelastic, then the price setter has more kind of more power. So if it's elastic, if it's more elastic, then it means it should be more. It should be stickier. If it's inelastic, it should be more flexible. So this was kind of two criteria. And as it's onset, I've said also not perfectly, but we knew basically which part of our CPI products were tradable. And when we go product by product, we went down product by product, and we judged also, and in case of questions, we elaborated more with statistics officers as well. And so in this particular case, it was more judgment rather than statistical computations, for example, as you mentioned, and quantification of, for example, duration or so on. If there is the answer that
Yeah, let me
fits to your
also
question.
sorry, yeah, about the US and the Armenia, how we did it. So for the US, we already had the measure of sticky price inflation from Atlanta Fed. So the methodology Miriam briefly discussed. So they looked at the prices, and they from the inflation basket, they excluded the prices that change more frequently. So they have a numerical criteria for that. And then we took this measure and excluded from that, based on our judgment, the tradable goods. But how we did for Armenia, because for Armenia we had no measure for a sticky price inflation, so we did everything from absolutely from scratch. So we took the most disaggregated inflation measure with 400 components. And first we looked at the frequency of changes in the prices. We had a numerical benchmark to see which one of these categories changes the most. But we also went through all the categories also, and based on the knowledge and judgment. So in the case of Armenia, it was combination of both. So we had some numerical benchmark, and we also based the calculation of the index on the judgment. Okay, hopefully that answers to your question. And do you have more questions?
Just one last question. I think the credibility measure that Miriam mentioned is really interesting. Could you go over the intuition behind that complex equation a bit?
Yeah, thank you.
Intuition.
As I mentioned as well, it's based on the methodology that Asya wrote a paper, and maybe she can elaborate much more, but I'll very briefly tell you. The idea of this credibility measure is that we look at the credibility of the central bank as an endogenous process, meaning that if the inflation, for example, deviates from its target, that means that central bank loses its credibility, in a very simple word. But in case of in Asya's methodology as well, she'll for sure elaborate more, but we have two inflation regimes. We call it low inflation regime and high inflation regime. And in a case of low inflation regime, we assume that what if, for example, inflation deviates from its 2% target in our case, and how this changes. And then what if in high inflation regime we have assumed that if our non-traded sticky price inflation converges to double digit 10%, we are moving to high inflation regime. And here our central bank is prone to lose its credibility more and more. Based on these regimes, basically, we construct this central bank performance indicator. And based on the central bank performance indicator, we say that credibility is a stock, and how the central bank performs, it accumulates, it adds up. By the way, I can share the screen, and maybe Asyajan, if you just pop up and say more. This is basically the methodology, how we have this. We have this in our paper as well, Panchanok. Here we have assumed that there is, for example, low inflation regime here. And here is NTSPI star, it corresponds to the 2% target. And here is high inflation regime. And here we, as I mentioned, we basically follow the literature where this in the literature as well, as a high inflation regime, 10% is considered to be pretty high. So once the inflation converges to the double digit, it's perceived to be in a high inflationary environment. So here it's how basically estimated. Here the calibration of the parameters in these particular cases could be different for different countries. We just looked from our perspectives, from the Georgian perspectives, and we recalibrated those raw parameters from our perspectives. And based on these two measures, we constructed, as I already said, based on the literature as well, central bank performance indicator. And once we have this indicator, here we have this credibility. But here, what I would like to take is that what we can say is that once inflation, for example, is once we are in a more low inflationary regime, this means that this NTSPI local just converges to zero, because deviation of the current inflation from this part is almost zero. And is zero, and given this is zero, it means that we have one in the denominator and one in the denominator. So our central bank performance indicator corresponds to 1. Once it corresponds to 1, and in case of credibility as well, the similar logic is playing the role. Once it corresponds to 1, we say that the central bank has high credibility, full credibility, because credibility can vary between 0 and 1. Just once it's closer to 1, it means that central bank performs well, and it anchors its inflation expectation. And once it converges to 0, it means that central bank basically loses its credibility. Here as well, these parameters are calibrated based on, for example, the initial condition for our credibility parameter, which is, as I mentioned, stock, meaning that it depends on the previous credibility plus this central bank performance indicator. What we have done is that in a Georgian case, I will tell, in Georgia case, we just judged what it would be the best initial conditions for our credibility, given that we were in the initial period of our inflation targeting regime, and given that our non-traded sticky CPI measure, where it stood at this period, we concluded that the 0.4, 0.5, somewhere in the middle, would be the best initial point for us, initial condition for us. Yes, and regarding maybe what I wanted to add is that I have not mentioned, but in case of Georgia, and I guess in case of Armenia as well, we treated this credibility slightly differently as well, given our local context. What I mean is that given that we are mostly in high inflationary periods, if you just look into our data, we will see that our inflation most episodes of our history used to be higher than our inflation target. And given that we have these inflationary pressures and the history, our credibility is more kind of asymmetric rather than symmetric. What we mean is that once we deviate up in an upward way to the target, we lose our credibility more. And once we deviate from the target in a downward way, once we are low, once our inflation is lower than target, for example, we actually do not exhibit losing credibility. So we took into account this while we are computing this credibility measure, how we just say that once inflation, for example, this NTSPI in general is lower than its target, 2% in our case, the central bank performance indicator has an impulse of 1, meaning that it equals 1. It performs well. And given that it's stock, it's for sure the credibility at this period does not equal to 1, but here this plays a role how we incorporated this asymmetry in our credibility measure. Maybe.
Yeah, we lost Miriam, but she will be back. So I just wanted to add that this measure of credibility, we also use it in our projection model, quarterly projection model, and it's even called endocred, so which means endogenous credibility, right? And we have been using that model for a few years already, and that methodology has been around for a while, and Doug was one of the creators of the models with endogenous credibility, and recently that approach has been gaining more support. Like a few weeks ago, even the former governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, was talking about that the central banks have to need to have models with endogenous policy credibility. So yeah, these measures, this is a very important measure to have in our methodology.
Sorry for something something unexpected happened. That's why I was lost, but I'm back. Yeah, I guess Asya was helping me in this. Thanks, Asya. And yeah, that was basically I was finishing anyway. So yeah, if you have questions. But I'm not really sure, but maybe as Jen mentioned or not, but maybe as I know that Armenians as well, my Armenian teammates are here as well. They also took into this account this asymmetry, and also they took into account these dollarization problems while they were constructing this measure. So there are different ways how we can treat this credibility measure. In our case, we did this. In Georgian case, we did this. By the way, I can share the link of our paper if you're interested in that chat. And in case of questions or any comments from your perspectives, we would be happy just to hear from you. So this is in the link. This is the is a link to our paper, which I've shared in the link in the messages. And yeah, maybe if you have questions regarding our part, we would be happy to answer to you anytime in case of technical part or just methodologically how we just approach this. Maybe if there are no questions, we can go from live Asya. I don't know, you know my better.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for being here. And as Miriam said, if you will have any questions, we will always be happy to respond. And we will be happy to also work on the application of non-traded sticky price inflation methodology to Thailand. So feel free to contact us. Thank you again.